The rain had followed Claire Bennett all the way from Charleston. By the time she crossed into North Carolina, gray clouds hung low over the highway, and the windshield wipers moved in a steady rhythm that somehow matched the ache inside her chest. Funerals were strange. People always talked about grief. Very few talked about disappointment. Yet disappointment was what Claire felt most as she drove away from her father's burial. Not because of the will, not because Daniel inherited the Charleston estate, not because Rebecca received operational control of Bennett Coastal Logistics. Those things hurt. But they weren't new. Being overlooked wasn't a fresh wound. It was simply an old one reopening. At 38 years old, Claire knew exactly where she ranked inside her family. Daniel was the future. Rebecca was the favorite. Claire was the reliable one. The one people called when something went wrong. The one who showed up. The one who stayed. And somehow, that never seemed to count. 4 hours later, she finally arrived back at her apartment outside Camp Lejeune. The building looked exactly as it always did. Faded paint, cracked sidewalks, a flickering hallway light that maintenance never seemed to fix. Home, at least for now. She climbed the stairs carrying her overnight bag and the small wooden box from the lawyer's office. The inheritance, if anyone could even call it that. Inside rested her grandfather Walter Bennett's military watch, a scratched, broken relic that hadn't worked in decades. Daniel's laughter echoed in her mind. Dad really left her grandpa's junk drawer watch. Rebecca's smile. The awkward silence from the attorney. The humiliation. Claire unlocked her apartment door and stepped inside. The familiar smell of coffee and old books greeted her. For the first time all day, she relaxed slightly. No family. No lawyers. No expectations. Just silence. She dropped her bag beside the couch and carried the wooden box into the kitchen. The watch rested inside, exactly where she remembered. Heavy. Cold. Worn smooth by decades of use. Her grandfather wore it through Korea. That much she knew. Not because he talked about the war. Walter Bennett rarely talked about anything. But Claire remembered sitting beside him as a child, while he polished the watch with an old cloth. He treated it with unusual care, almost reverence. At the time, she assumed it was sentiment. Now she wasn't so sure. She turned the watch over in her hand. The crystal was scratched. The leather strap cracked. The hands frozen permanently at 11:17. Dead. Just like the battery? Just like the inheritance. Claire sighed. Then, tossed it into a kitchen drawer beside spare batteries and takeout menus. Enough. She poured herself a glass of bourbon and sat near the window. Outside, rain tapped softly against the glass. For a while, she simply stared into the darkness, thinking about her father, thinking about the funeral, thinking about all the things neither of them had ever said. Eventually, exhaustion won. She went to bed. 3 days later, 7:12 a.m. Knock. 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 Claire's eyes opened instantly. Military. Not loud. Not aggressive. Precise. Controlled. The kind of knock that announced discipline rather than urgency. She glanced at the clock. Who the hell was visiting at this hour? Still half asleep, she crossed the apartment and opened the door. Then froze. A black government SUV sat parked outside. Standing in front of it was an elderly Marine officer wearing 4 stars. For one impossible second, Claire thought she was dreaming. The winter sunlight reflected off the silver hair beneath his cap. His uniform looked immaculate. Every ribbon perfectly aligned. Every crease flawless. The man carried himself like someone who had spent an entire lifetime commanding respect. And somehow, he was standing outside her apartment. The general looked directly at her, then raised his hand, and saluted. Not casually. Not politely. Formally. The kind of salute Marines remember forever. Every sound disappeared. The elderly woman from apartment 2B stopped carrying groceries. A maintenance worker froze halfway across the parking lot. Even Claire forgot how to breathe. Staff Sergeant Claire Bennett? His voice was calm, measured, powerful. Yes, sir. The general slowly lowered his hand. His eyes studied her carefully. Not her apartment. Not her clothes. Hair. As though he had spent years searching for someone and had finally found them. Then his gaze shifted toward the kitchen. Toward the drawer. Toward the watch? Good, he said quietly. Claire frowned. Sir? The old Marine nodded toward the apartment. May I come in? Without waiting for an answer, her training kicked in. Of course, sir. The general stepped inside. The apartment suddenly felt much smaller. Claire closed the door behind him. The old officer removed his gloves carefully. Every movement looked deliberate, disciplined, practiced. Only then did she notice the slight stiffness in his gait. The price of old wars. The price of long service. The general glanced around the apartment. A folded uniform. Military awards. Coffee mugs in the sink. A stack of VA paperwork on the counter. Then he looked back at her. You live alone? Yes, sir. He nodded. Not surprised. Almost as though he already knew. Finally, he extended a hand. General Raymond Mercer. Claire nearly dropped the coffee mug she was holding. Raymond Mercer. The Raymond Mercer. Former Commandant of the Marine Corps. A living legend. A man every Marine knew by name. Her pulse quickened. Sir, what are you doing here? For the first time, a faint smile appeared. The kind old warriors wore when remembering ghosts. I knew your grandfather. Silence. Claire stared. Mercer slowly removed his cap. His expression softened. I served under Walter Bennett. The room suddenly felt colder. My grandfather? Mercer nodded. Your grandfather saved my life. Claire sat down heavily. Because somehow that statement felt larger than the 4 stars. Larger than the SUV. Larger than everything. The old Marine looked toward the kitchen drawer again. Then asked the question that would change her life. Have you opened the back of the watch yet? Claire blinked. The back? Mercer smiled. Ah, sad smile. Walter always enjoyed secrets. Slowly, Claire crossed the kitchen, opened the drawer, and retrieved the watch. Mercer's eyes never left it. Not for a second. As if he was looking at far more than an old piece of metal. Claire handed it over. The general held it gently. Almost respectfully. Like a sacred object. His fingers moved across the side. Searching. Remembering. Then he pressed near the winding crown. Click. A tiny sound echoed through the kitchen. Claire froze. The back of the watch opened. And hidden inside was something neither of them expected to see again. A small, yellowed piece of folded paper. Waiting silently for more than 70 years. Claire stared at the tiny strip of paper for several seconds. The kitchen suddenly felt too quiet. Outside, someone started a car in the parking lot. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Normal sounds. Ordinary sounds. Yet nothing felt ordinary anymore. The folded paper rested inside the watch like a message from another lifetime. General Mercer handed it to her carefully. You should open it. Claire swallowed. The paper felt brittle between her fingers. 70 years. Maybe more. Hidden inside a watch that everyone in her family considered worthless. Including her father. Including Daniel. Including Rebecca. Slowly, she unfolded it. 3 things were written inside. A set of coordinates. A safety deposit box number. And a single handwritten sentence. For the one who understands service. Claire read it twice. Then a third time. The words didn't change. Neither did the growing tension in her chest. What does this mean? General Mercer sat down at her tiny kitchen table. For the first time since arriving, he looked old. Not weak. Just burdened. Like a man carrying memories heavier than most people could imagine. It means Walter Bennett knew exactly what he was doing. Claire sat across from him. The watch lay between them. The old Marine stared at it for a long moment. Then began speaking. December, 1952. His voice was quiet. Steady. The chosen reservoir. Claire listened. Every Marine knew the name. One of the harshest campaigns in Corps history. Freezing temperatures. Brutal combat. Impossible survival. Mercer's eyes drifted somewhere far away. Back across 70 years. I was 19. A faint smile touched his lips. Thought I knew everything. Claire almost smiled. Almost. Your grandfather was my platoon sergeant. Mercer's expression softened. Meanest man I ever respected. That actually made her laugh. Because it sounded exactly right. Walter Bennett had never been warm. Never sentimental. But he had been dependable. The kind of man whose word carried weight? Mercer nodded. He kept us alive. The old Marine described an ambush. A classified reconnaissance mission. A frozen valley. Enemy soldiers closing from multiple directions. Young Marines dying in the snow. And one terrified 19-year-old corporal named Raymond Mercer taking shrapnel in his leg. I couldn't walk. His voice remained calm, matter-of-fact, as though discussing weather. The others were pulling back. Claire leaned forward slightly. What happened? Mercer looked directly at her. Your grandfather carried me. Silence. He carried me almost 2 miles. Claire felt something tighten inside her chest. Mercer continued. Enemy fire. Sub-zero temperatures. No support. No guarantee we'd survive. The old general smiled faintly, but Walter Bennett never cared much about guarantees. Claire stared at him. Every word felt impossible, yet completely believable. Mercer glanced toward his hands. The frostbite permanently damaged his fingers. Claire immediately thought of her grandfather struggling to button shirts, struggling to hold tools, struggling to write. All those years. And nobody ever explained why. Nobody. Not even her father. Mercer noticed the realization. Thomas knew. Claire froze. My father? Yes. The answer landed like a punch. Her father knew. All these years. And never told her. Never told anyone. Why? Mercer seemed to read the question before she asked it. Your father admired Walter. A pause. But I think he spent most of his life feeling smaller than him. Claire looked away. Because somehow that explanation made perfect sense. Her father had spent decades chasing success. Status. Recognition. Money. Always trying to prove something. Always trying to become someone. Maybe he had been competing with a ghost. Mercer nodded toward the paper. Your grandfather created that safety deposit box decades ago. Claire looked back down. The numbers suddenly seemed more important. He told me only one grandchild would ever open it. Claire blinked. One? One. The old Marine smiled slightly. He was very specific. Something inside Claire stirred. A mixture of curiosity and sadness. Because she already suspected what came next. He didn't choose Daniel. Mercer chuckled. No. Rebecca? No. Claire looked down at the watch. Then quietly asked, Why me? Mercer's expression became serious. Because Walter trusted you. The answer hit harder than expected. Not loved. Not favored. Trusted. For some reason that mattered more. 2 hours later, they arrived at a small veterans-owned bank outside Jacksonville. The building looked unremarkable. Red brick. White columns. American flag fluttering outside. Nothing special. Until the manager saw General Mercer. The elderly banker nearly stopped breathing. General. Mercer shook his head. Not today. Then pointed toward Claire. She's the Bennett. The manager immediately straightened. Everything changed. He escorted them downstairs without asking questions. Past security doors. Past vaults. Past rows of safety deposit boxes. Eventually they entered a private room. The manager stopped beside one particular drawer. Claire's pulse quickened. The number matched the paper. Exactly. The room suddenly felt colder. Mercer stepped back. This belongs to you. Claire inserted the key. Her hands trembled slightly. Then she turned it. Click. The lock released. Slowly she pulled the drawer open. And froze. Inside sat several thick envelopes. Military documents. Old photographs. Leather folders. And dozens of stock certificates. For a moment her brain refused to process what she was seeing. What is this? Mercer picked up one certificate. Studied it. Then handed it over. Claire read the company name. And nearly dropped it. Bennett Coastal Logistics. Her family's company. She grabbed another. Then another. Then another. All the same. All bearing Walter Bennett's name. Her breathing quickened. How many are there? Mercer remained silent. Instead, he pointed toward a ledger resting beneath the certificates. Claire opened it. The numbers inside made her stomach drop. Her grandfather had quietly accumulated shares for decades. Year after year. Quarter after quarter. Long before Daniel was born. Long before Rebecca. Long before anyone suspected. The final page showed the total ownership percentage. Claire stared. Blinking. Certain she was reading it wrong. 51%. Controlling ownership. She read it again. Then again. Still the same number. 51%. The majority. The company didn't belong to Daniel. It never had. Not completely. Not even to her father. Walter Bennett had remained the true controlling owner all along. And now, the ownership transferred to her. Claire slowly sat down, unable to speak, unable to think. Mercer watched quietly, giving her time. Eventually she whispered, "My father knew?" Parts of it. The answer somehow hurt even more, because it meant Thomas Bennett spent years allowing Daniel to believe something that was never true. Mercer pointed toward one final envelope. It sat beneath everything else. Yellowed with age. Claire immediately recognized the handwriting. Walter, her grandfather. The envelope simply read, "For Claire." Nothing else. No instructions. No explanation. Just her name. She opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper. One sentence. Only one. Claire read it silently, then felt goosebumps spread across her arms. If your family has forgotten what honor means, remind them. She looked up slowly. Mercer was already watching her. Not smiling. Not speaking. Just waiting. Because both of them understood the same thing. The watch had never been the inheritance. It had been the key. And whatever came next was going to change the Bennett family forever. Claire barely slept that night. The hotel room overlooked the Charleston harbor, but she spent most of the darkness sitting beside the window with her grandfather's watch resting in her hand. 51%. The number kept replaying in her mind. Not 49. Not 25. Control. Her grandfather had intentionally left her control. Not Daniel. Not Rebecca. Here. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, Claire finally understood what troubled her most. It wasn't the shares. It was the trust. Walter Bennett had spent decades building a plan that depended on one assumption: that someday his family would need someone willing to choose responsibility over pride. And somehow, he believed that person would be her. The realization felt heavier than ownership. Much heavier. The next morning, Charleston woke up to chaos. At exactly 6:12 a.m., General Mercer's interview aired on a local television station. By 8 a.m., the story had spread across veteran organizations throughout the state. By noon, it was everywhere. Forgotten Korean War hero saved future Marine commandant during classified mission. The article featured an old black-and-white photograph. Walter Bennett, young, covered in snow, standing beside a wounded 19-year-old Marine named Raymond Mercer. Claire stared at the screen from her hotel room. The image felt unreal. Her grandfather had spent the final years of his life feeding birds on a porch swing and arguing with weather forecasts. Now television anchors were calling him a war hero. The irony would have amused him. Her phone started ringing, then ringing again, and again. Cousin, old family friends, former Marines, people she hadn't heard from in years. One retired gunnery sergeant left a voicemail thanking Walter for his service. Another caller said he cried reading the article. Claire listened quietly. Meanwhile, Daniel left 5 messages before noon. None of them sounded grateful. The 6th was shorter, more direct. Get down here. Now. No greeting. No explanation. Just an order. Some things never changed. An hour later, Claire stood outside Bennett Coastal Logistics headquarters. The building overlooked Charleston Harbor. Glass. Steel. Expensive architecture designed to impress people. Her grandfather would have hated it. Walter Bennett believed money should work, not pose. Employees filled the lobby. Conversation stopped when Claire entered. Several people recognized her immediately. Not from family gatherings. From the article. The receptionist stood so quickly her chair nearly rolled backward. Miss Bennett. Interesting. 3 days earlier, she had been the daughter who inherited a broken watch. Now she was Miss Bennett. Amazing what 51% ownership could do to people's manners. The elevator carried her toward the executive floor. When the doors opened, she immediately saw Daniel. Pacing. Angry. Sweating despite the air conditioning. Rebecca sat near the conference room entrance. Her makeup couldn't completely hide the exhaustion in her face. Daniel pointed at Claire the moment he saw her. You went public. Claire remained calm. I didn't release anything. Mercer did. He told the truth. Daniel laughed bitterly. The truth? He spread his arms dramatically. The stock dropped 9% this morning. Several executives nearby pretended not to listen, failed. Everyone was listening. Claire crossed her arms. No, Daniel. His jaw tightened. The stock dropped because investors discovered the company is carrying massive undisclosed debt. Silence. Rebecca looked away. Daniel froze. Interesting. Very interesting. Claire studied his face, then asked quietly, "How much?" Nobody answered. Daniel. Still silence. "How much debt?" His shoulders stiffened. Rebecca finally whispered, 58 million. The number hit like a punch. Claire stared. Not because she didn't believe it, because she suddenly understood why Daniel looked terrified. $58 million. The company wasn't struggling. It was bleeding. Jesus Christ. Daniel looked defensive immediately. I was expanding. No. Claire's voice remained calm. You are gambling. His face reddened. You have no idea how business works. The statement almost made her laugh. For 20 years, whenever Daniel found himself cornered, he used the same strategy. Attack competence. Dismiss experience. Question qualification. Unfortunately for him, Marines were difficult to intimidate. Claire stepped closer. I know enough to understand $58 million. The hallway went quiet. Rebecca rubbed her forehead. Daniel looked away first. Another interesting detail. The conference room doors opened. Several board members waited inside. Lawyers. Executives. Financial advisors. People who suddenly looked nervous. Very nervous. The emergency meeting began immediately. For nearly 4 hours, Claire listened. Shipping contracts. Expansion failures. Debt exposure. Loan structures. Risk assessments. The deeper she dug, the worse it became. Daniel hadn't stolen money. That became clear fairly quickly. He wasn't secretly buying yachts, or hiding funds offshore, or living like a criminal. The truth was almost worse. Daniel genuinely believed he was saving the company. Every bad decision came from ambition. Every gamble came from desperation. Every risk came from fear. Fear of failure. Fear of looking weak. Fear of becoming the son who ruined the family legacy. The more Claire listened, the more she saw something familiar. Her father. Daniel wasn't becoming Walter Bennett. He was becoming Thomas Bennett, a man trapped by expectations, a man trying desperately to prove himself. Eventually, one board member spoke. What happens now? The question hung heavily in the room. Everyone knew the answer. Or thought they did. Several executives glanced toward Claire. Several attorneys did the same. They expected blood. Corporate people often did. Public removal. Scandal. Humiliation. A sacrifice. The easiest solution was always finding someone to blame. Daniel seemed to understand this. For the first time all day, he looked genuinely afraid. Not of losing money. Of losing everything. The board chairman adjusted his glasses. Miss Bennett. Again. Miss Bennett. Not Claire. Not Daniel's sister. Power changed vocabulary quickly. The chairman cleared his throat. Under the ownership structure confirmed yesterday. He hesitated, then continued. The authority to determine executive leadership now belongs to you. Silence. Complete silence. Every eye in the room turned toward Claire. Daniel's. Rebecca's. The lawyers. The executives. All waiting. All wondering. All expecting. Claire slowly looked around the table, then down at the watch resting beside her notebook. Her grandfather's watch, the watch everyone laughed at, the watch that led her here. And suddenly she realized something important. Walter Bennett hadn't left her power. He had left her a test, because power was easy, character was difficult, and now she had to decide which one would define her. The silence inside the conference room seemed to stretch forever. Every eye remained fixed on Claire. The board members, the attorneys, the executives, Rebecca, Daniel, all waiting, all calculating, all expecting her to do the obvious thing. Destroy him. The chairman folded his hands carefully. Miss Bennett. Claire looked up. Yes? Would you like us to prepare a formal removal motion? There it was. The corporate execution. Clean. Public. Permanent. One signature. One vote. And Daniel Bennett's career would be over. The room remained silent. Daniel didn't argue. Didn't defend himself. Didn't plead. For the first time since Claire arrived, he simply looked tired. Very tired. Almost defeated. Claire glanced toward the harbor outside the windows. Cargo ships moved slowly through the water. Dock cranes stretched against the afternoon sky. Thousands of people depended on those ships. Thousands depended on this company. The realization settled heavily inside her chest. This wasn't about family anymore. It hadn't been for a while. The board chairman spoke again. "Miss Bennett?" Claire finally answered. "I want 48 hours. Several attorneys exchanged confused looks. 48 hours? One asked. Yes. Daniel blinked. The chairman frowned. For what purpose? To review every financial document personally. A younger attorney immediately objected. With respect, the situation requires immediate action. Claire turned toward him. Her voice remained calm. So does every combat situation. The room went quiet. The attorney stopped talking. Yet Marines still gather intelligence before making decisions. Nobody argued after that. 48 hours were granted. The meeting adjourned. As executives filed out, Daniel remained seated. Rebecca remained seated too. The three siblings suddenly found themselves alone inside the room. The same room. The same family. Completely different circumstances. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Finally, Rebecca broke first. "I don't recognize us anymore." Her voice sounded small, fragile. Claire looked at her sister carefully. Rebecca always appeared confident, perfect, composed. Yet now she looked exhausted, like someone carrying secrets for too long. Daniel laughed bitterly. "Maybe this is who we've always been." The statement hung heavily in the air. Because nobody could honestly disagree. Claire slowly sat down again. "You really borrowed $58 million? Daniel rubbed both hands across his face. Not all at once. Not exactly a reassuring answer. "Why?" Daniel stared at the table, long enough that Claire almost thought he wouldn't answer. Then finally, "Because I was terrified." That surprised her. Not the fear. The honesty. Rebecca looked shocked too. Daniel exhaled heavily. "You think Dad left me a company?" He laughed softly. A humorless sound. "He left me a mountain." Nobody interrupted. "I spent 15 years trying to prove I deserved it." His eyes remained fixed on the polished table. Every quarter. Every investor call. Every board meeting. Every mistake. The words came faster now. Like something finally breaking loose. Dad never cared when things were good. But when they were bad, he stopped. Claire understood. Because she remembered. Their father had always measured worth through success. Performance. Results. Not effort. Not character. Results. Rebecca quietly wiped a tear. "I hated those dinners." Daniel looked at her. "What dinners?" "The ones where Dad compared us." Silence. Daniel frowned. Rebecca continued. "He compared your profits. Claire's military record. My marriage. Everything became a competition. Every holiday. Every birthday. Every family gathering." Claire suddenly remembered dozens of examples. Comments she ignored. Remarks she dismissed. Comparisons disguised as jokes. God. Rebecca was right. Daniel leaned back slowly. "He did that because he wanted us stronger." "No?" The answer came from Claire. Both siblings looked at her. "He did it because that's how Grandpa raised him." Nobody spoke. The realization landed heavily. Generational damage. Passed down like an inheritance. Walter fought a war. Thomas grew up chasing impossible standards. Daniel inherited the pressure. Rebecca inherited the insecurity. Claire inherited the responsibility. Nobody escaped untouched. The conference room suddenly felt much smaller. Rebecca stared toward the harbor. "I spent years thinking Dad loved me less." Daniel laughed softly. "I thought he loved you more." Rebecca blinked. "What?" "You were always protected." Rebecca shook her head. "No, you were." "No, Danielle." For the first time her voice hardened. "You got attention. I got protection. There's a difference." The room went quiet. Claire listened carefully. Because for the first time in their lives, nobody was performing. Nobody was pretending. Nobody was competing. Just truth. Messu. Painful, honest truth. Later that evening, Claire returned to her hotel. The harbor glowed orange beneath the setting sun. She spread financial reports across the bed. Balance sheets. debt schedules, contracts, loan agreements. The deeper she looked, the clearer the picture became. Daniel made terrible decisions. But he wasn't a thief. He wasn't corrupt. He wasn't malicious. He was desperate. And desperation often looked a lot like recklessness. Around midnight, someone knocked softly on her hotel door. Claire opened it. Rebecca stood outside holding 2 coffees. "You too?" Claire smiled slightly. "Couldn't sleep." Rebecca entered. They sat near the window overlooking the harbor. For a while, neither spoke. Then Rebecca finally asked, "Are you going to ruin him?" Straight to the point. Claire appreciated that. She stared into her coffee. "I don't know." Rebecca nodded slowly, then surprised her. "I don't think he deserves to be destroyed." Claire looked up. "Really?" Rebecca laughed sadly. "Oh, he deserves consequences. A pause. But not destruction." She looked out toward the harbor. "Dad spent his whole life afraid." The statement surprised Claire. Rebecca continued, "Afraid of failing Grandpa. Daniel spent his life afraid of failing Dad." Another pause. "And honestly," she smiled weakly, "I spent most of my life afraid of failing both of them." The room fell silent. Claire thought about Walter's letter. If your family forgot what honor means, remind them. Not punish them. Not destroy them. Remind them. Maybe that distinction mattered. The next morning, Claire drove alone to the cemetery. The Charleston sky remained gray. Fresh flowers rested beside her father's grave. Probably Rebecca. Claire stood there quietly for a long time. Eventually, she pulled her grandfather's watch from her pocket. The watch felt heavier now. Not because of its value, because of what it represented. Duty. Responsibility. Trust. "Why me, Grandpa?" The wind moved softly through the trees. No answer came. At least not directly. But as Claire looked across the cemetery, something finally became clear. Walter didn't choose her because she was smarter, or stronger, or more successful. He chose her because she understood something the rest of them forgot. Power wasn't about winning. It was about stewardship, responsibility, service, the same lesson the Marines taught her decades earlier. And suddenly, she knew exactly what she was going to do. The emergency board meeting reconvened at 3 o'clock that afternoon. The atmosphere felt electric. Everyone expected fireworks. Everyone expected blood. The chairman immediately turned toward Claire. "Miss Bennett." The room fell silent. She remained standing, calm, certain, ready, because after 48 hours of reflection, she finally understood the difference between revenge and justice. And the decision she was about to make would change not only Daniel's future, but the future of the entire Bennett family. The conference room fell completely silent. 48 hours of speculation. 48 hours of rumors. 48 hours of attorneys preparing for war. And now everyone was waiting for Claire Bennett to decide who would survive it. The chairman adjusted his glasses. "Miss Bennett?" Claire remained standing at the head of the table. Her grandfather's watch rested beside her notebook. Steady. Silent. Watching, just as Walter Bennett seemed to have done his entire life. She looked around the room. Board members. Attorneys. Executives. Daniel. Rebecca. Every face carried the same question. What happens now? Claire finally spoke. The company survives. A few people visibly relaxed. Others looked disappointed. Especially the attorneys. Corporate lawyers preferred drama. It generated invoices. Claire continued. After reviewing all financial records, I have reached a conclusion. Daniel lowered his eyes. Ready. The chairman nodded. Proceed. Claire took a slow breath. Effective immediately, Daniel Bennett is removed as Chief Executive Officer. The room went still. Daniel closed his eyes. Not shocked. Not angry. Just resigned. As if he had expected this moment from the second the watch opened. The chairman immediately began reaching for paperwork. Then Claire continued. However, every head lifted. Daniel Bennett will not be accused of fraud. Several attorneys exchanged confused looks. One of them immediately leaned forward. Miss Bennett, with respect. Claire raised one hand. The room became silent again. He made reckless decisions. He exercised poor judgment. He endangered the company. She looked directly at Daniel. But he was trying to save it. A long pause followed. Claire continued. He was wrong. He was arrogant. He was reckless. But he was not stealing. The board members looked uncomfortable, because that distinction ruined the dramatic ending many of them wanted. Daniel started at her. Speechless, Claire turned toward the chairman. All expansion projects are frozen. Executive bonuses are suspended. A few executives shifted in their seats. Good. Non-essential corporate properties will be sold. Executive compensation will be reduced. Now several executives looked openly irritated. Even better, Claire's voice remained calm. Employee pensions will be protected. The room became very quiet, because suddenly everyone understood who would actually bear the cost. Not dock workers, not truck drivers, not office staff. Leadership. Exactly as Walter Bennett would have wanted. One executive raised his hand. And Daniel? Claire looked toward her brother. For a moment she remembered the funeral. The mocking laughter. The humiliation. The inheritance jokes. The years of disrespect. All of it. Then she remembered the cemetery. The watch. The letter. The responsibility. And she answered, Daniel remains with the company. Every person in the room froze. Even Daniel. What? Claire nodded. You'll remain employed. Daniel started. You can't be serious. I am. What position? Claire didn't hesitate. Senior Operations Manager. A demotion. A significant one. No corner office. No private executive floor. No CEO title. No prestige. Just work. Real work. For several seconds, Daniel said nothing. His face flushed red. Humiliation. Pain. Shock. Then something unexpected happened. He nodded. Just once. Because deep down he knew it was fair. Rebecca looked stunned. You're keeping him? Claire turned toward her. I'm keeping accountability. The difference mattered. The room remained silent. Finally the chairman spoke. The motion passes. Just like that, years of dysfunction officially ended. The meeting adjourned shortly afterward. Board members filed out. Attorneys gathered documents. Executives whispered among themselves. Eventually only 3 people remained. Claire, Daniel, Rebecca, the Bennett children, for the first time in their lives, without their father's shadow, without competition, without pretending. Daniel stared at the harbor outside the window. You should have fired me. Claire smiled faintly. Maybe. He laughed softly. I would have. I know. For some reason that made both of them smile. Rebecca shook her head. I still don't understand you. Claire looked at her sister. No. She glanced down at the watch. I think Grandpa did. Nobody had a response to that. That evening, Claire met General Mercer beside the marina. The harbor glowed gold beneath the setting sun. Fishing boats drifted across the water. The old Marine listened quietly while she explained everything. When she finished, he simply nodded. Walter would approve. Claire looked toward the water. I still feel angry. Mercer smiled. You should. A pause. I wanted them to hurt. The old Marine nodded again. Of course you did. Claire frowned. That's not very wise. Mercer chuckled. No. His eyes drifted toward the harbor. It's human. Silence settled between them. Finally, Mercer spoke again. Forgiveness isn't pretending pain never happened. Claire looked at him. The old general's voice softened. It's refusing to hand your pain to someone else. The word stayed with her, because suddenly she understood. Walter hadn't trusted her with power. He trusted her to stop the damage. To end it. Not continue it. Before leaving, Mercer handed her one final envelope. Old. Yellowed. Worn with age. Claire recognized the handwriting immediately. Her father's. The sight alone tightened her chest. Mercer nodded toward it. I found this among Walter's papers. Claire stared at the envelope. For Claire. Nothing else. No explanation. Just her name. The same way Walter had written it. She waited until later that night to open it. Alone. On the balcony of her hotel room. Charleston Harbor shimmered beneath the darkness. The letter trembled slightly in her hands. Then she unfolded it. The first sentence stole her breath. Clary? If you're reading this, then I probably waited too long again. Tears immediately filled her eyes. Not because the words were perfect. Because they sounded exactly like him. For the next hour she read. And cried. Not dramatic sobbing. Not rage. Not grief. Something quieter. The letter explained everything. His mistakes. His fears. His failures. His regrets. The impossible standards Walter unknowingly created. The pressure he passed to Daniel. The expectations he buried Rebecca beneath. The responsibility he placed on Claire without realizing it. Near the end came a paragraph she would never forget. "You became the best of all of us, Claire. And I think part of me resented you for it. Not because you made me feel small. Because you reminded me of the man I wished I'd been." Claire read the words 3 times. Then cried harder than she had at the funeral. Because anger finally had somewhere to go. And once it left, only sadness remained. 1 year later, Bennett Coastal Logistics survived. Not easily. Not quickly. But it survived. Debt restructuring. Contract renegotiations. Executive reductions. Long hours. Hard choices. The company emerged smaller. Healthier. Stronger. Daniel changed too. Losing the CEO title humbled him. For months he barely spoke during meetings. Then one afternoon Claire found him working beside dock crews under brutal summer heat. No cameras. No audience. Just work. When he noticed her watching, he smiled awkwardly. "I forgot what this company actually does." It was the most honest thing he had ever said. Rebecca changed as well. She quietly launched support programs for military widows and veterans' families. Not for publicity. Not for attention. Because she genuinely cared. General Mercer passed away 11 months later, 93 years old, peacefully. At his funeral, an officer handed Claire a small package. Inside sat Walter Bennett's watch. Completely restored. Ticking perfectly. Attached was a note from Mercer. "Some things only work again after enough time and pressure." Claire wore the watch every day after that. Not because it was valuable. Because it reminded her what inheritance really meant. Not money. Not power. Not ownership. Responsibility. Truth. Grace. A few weeks later, Walter Bennett finally received a public military commendation, decades overdue. As applause echoed across the ceremony grounds, Claire touched the watch on her wrist, then glanced toward the empty chair reserved for General Mercer, and smiled. Because at last she understood what both old Marines had spent their lives trying to teach. Strength without humility destroys people. Strength with compassion rebuilds them. And sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't what someone leaves behind. It's the opportunity to become better than the pain they inherited.